When I was 9 years old, that is 40 years ago, an accident happened to me in a pioneer camp near Krasnoyarsk. I, a tadpole, in love with a new counselor, ran away right after the horn. I could not appear before my love in the glitter of my skinny, pale legs and shaved head after lice. My sister brought it from the garden, and according to my age, I was supposed to wear black shorts as sportswear, which my grandmother had sewn for growing up, equipping them with a universal elastic band in the expectation that I would grow up and wean myself in the camp. But neither fat nor tan stuck to me, and I hung out in these shorts like a white worm in a skirt. The food was really good, though. We had the best camp at all. Oh, it's not subjective. We were competing from the chemical metallurgical plant, swallow and a black swallow on the gate, and pioneer bonfires, and war games and camping trips. I got all that for 3 weeks, and then I ran away. Not really. Not home. Not toward the city, but to wander through the woods, to experience my first feeling. Of course I got lost. Of course. I climbed a tree. Good thing. The reserve is nearby. Cyanide rocks. It's not hard to orient myself. And the next thing is simple. My hand got stuck in a deep crack of an old pine tree, trying to pull my hand out. I practically hung on it and naturally broke it. I managed to sit on the branch, but I couldn't get my arm out, and by the time they found me, amputation was inevitable. I now type, as you might guess, with one hand. And now, having smoked 4 cigarettes after the last paragraph, I will tell you what I don't believe, what seems to me to be utter nonsense, and what I have known deep inside myself all these 40 years, while managing to lie to myself, even in my memories. Every time I looked at the stump, at that white-pink, smooth, bumpy end of my arm that disgusts me to this day, I thought, cracked pine, crash syndrome, amputation. Not once in my entire life have I ever tried to remember those hours in detail, and not once have I been surprised by it. But 2 weeks ago, while making the rounds of area veterans at work, I met an old man, a former pioneer camp supervisor, and it turns out I remember everything. I remember how I overcame the first 3 meters of a pine tree, a rough trunk without branches, covering my palms and shins with tar and small abrasions. As at a height of about 5 meters, I looked down, and I was all as one muscle, cramped with fear. My legs buckled, wrapping themselves around the branch I was sitting on and weaving a lock underneath it. My hands clutched at the trunk, and I pressed my cheek into the tree, instantly covered in tear. My skin was sore, and there were so many branches overhead that I couldn't see the sky. Far below, the ground was grassless, with knobby tree roots poking through the red clay soil. Between the roots, you could see pieces of cyanite protruding from the ground. If you fell, you could not avoid fractures. Gradually, fear began to replace self-pity. Not only am I lost and can't get down, but I'm ugly and funny, and my palms are on fire, and if someone finds out that I'm in love, I'll be teased to death, and no one will come to rescue me, and my mother will give birth to a new son, and my dad wouldn't have to go on shifts for a few months, because he would love him and change his job, and I would freeze and fall at night, and no one would find me. These were the thoughts that went round and round, and I gave them free rein. But after crying, I suddenly found that I was no longer afraid, realizing that there was no one to pity with tears. I remember it very well. I was delighted to find in myself the intention to save myself, and return to the camp as a hero. And then, it turned out that I couldn't tear my right palm off the pine tree. The burning in my scraped fingers and palm intensified many times over, and when I tried to pull away, they were so painful that I choked. I yanked and twisted my hand, tried to reach around to the opposite side of the trunk and see what was holding it, but any disturbance caused new pain. It was like a needle had been stuck into every cell of skin on my palm. And those needles continued to slowly, very slowly, advance further and further. Soon, a crimson bruise crept up my forearm. I watched the swelling spread from my invisible hand to my elbow, and I lost the ability to move my arm. The pain intensified so quickly that I didn't have time to get used to it. If I may, I will not describe the next few hours in detail. Pretty soon I realized that the tree wouldn't let go of my skin. I had to touch a branch or a trunk with my bare knees. Shins, cheek, and in a minute, when I tried to move away, there were small pieces of horny layer of skin on the bark, which could be cut off with a razor in case of longer contact. My blood was left on the tree, drops of which, not having time to run down the bark, were absorbed into it. Knee-length underpants and slippers were my salvation. I made all these discoveries against the background of the ever-increasing pain. The immobile palm of my hand felt as if it were being burned with hot iron. Chewed with teeth, broken bones, I screamed and cried again and beat the wood and tore my voice. But I still screamed, shrieked, sobbed, and then I didn't care anymore. I was tired. The sun had passed its zenith, and the shadows from the branches were thicker and colder. I leaned my forehead against the trunk and counted to 50. Then I leaned my cheek and counted to 50. Then I'd put my left hand under my head and count. When I got tired of counting, I would fall asleep and nothing would happen. The forearm of my right hand had doubled in volume, and the bruise had crept up to my shoulder. I peed my pants and didn't notice it right away. I was freezing, and now I felt my arm as something foreign. It hurt unimaginably, but it didn't hurt me. Everything else hurt. My legs, my neck, my stomach. I found myself with my forehead pressed against the trunk. How long I sat like that, I didn't notice. I started counting, but I couldn't remember the order of the numbers. So I started calling numbers at random. 2, 10, 7. I thought the number 50 was glowing in front of me, but I couldn't catch up. The skin on my forehead felt as if it had been cauterized, and I didn't move. And I didn't respond when several voices started shouting my name, and then the chainsaw squealed. Falling with the tree, I lost consciousness. I broke 2 ribs, my collarbone and 3 toes. I remember only one more moment. I open my eyes and a cloth with an acrid odor is pressed against my nose, and a woman's voice coaxes me, "Breathe in, little one. Breathe in." I am held in the balance, and a thick, dark tube goes from my shoulder to the lying trunk of a pine tree. I don't immediately realize it's my hand. There is no palm. The hand goes into the wood, into the woody growth where my palm should be. I inhale sharply. A pungent stench hits my throat, and I feel like I'm drowning in warm water. The last thing I see is a strange metal instrument being brought to my hand. I woke up only 8 days later, in a hospital in Divnogorsk, a small town near Krasnoyarsk, which had only just become a town at that time. The doctor forbade my mother to take me to Krasnoyarsk. On the very first day after my awakening, together with the camp chief and the camp doctor, another man came to see me. He told me, time after time, about the gap in the old pine tree, about the danger of prolonged squeezing, about how bravely I had tried to jump off the pine tree, breaking my arm in the process. No matter how hard I try, I can't remember his clothes or his face. A few days later, my father arrived, and I told him about the crack and the fracture in a voice that had barely broken after the breakdown. And it turned out that there was nothing to prevent me from returning to the city. There's not much left. I'll take a break, tell you what it's like to live after an arm amputation. It's okay, I guess. I read a book by this disabled man with no arms and legs, Vujicic, and others I've read. But maybe it's too late to read it, because everything seems to be working out physically. But I still feel the ceiling. All my life, I feel a ceiling. Some bear that I just don't dare to jump to. Yeah, it's my fault. Maybe I could have overcome it. But the bottom line is this. I'm 50. I'm single. I work at a social support center. I distribute benefits to veterans, and I hate looking at myself naked. That's me stalling. So, on New Year's Eve, I spent a few hours visiting with the former head of a pioneer camp. By virtue of his position, this man had signed more than one non-disclosure paper in his life, it would seem. The head of a children's camp, eh? And now, in his deep old age, he does not even know whether these bans imposed on him by another country are now in force. It's been 20 years since anyone reminded him of those papers. One of them gave him and the camp's staff, strict instructions about the prohibition of weaning children from the camp into the forest and searching for such runaways. In particular, the involvement of persons outside the list specified in the paper in the search for the missing was allowed only on the second day. And on the first day, the participants of the search team had to have a chainsaw, or in its absence, a two-handed saw and axes. I don't want to, but I have to tell you about 2 photos from his archive. There was a tree and some kind of animal, a section of the back of some animal, most likely a small bear cub, and except for this part of the back sticking out of the trunk, there was nothing left of the animal. The next photo showed the cut of this tree, just at the level of the bear's remains. The black and white photo allowed us to see the abnormal change in the structure of the rings, on the fresh cut of the stump, just chaos and dark spots spreading all over the cut. I have no strength to retell the stories of the camp commander. According to him, he saw such trees 5 times. Twice he was shown them specially, and 3 times he saw them himself, including the episode with me. So that's it now. While writing this, I smoked 22 cigarettes. And most importantly, what I was writing all this for. Questions. Does a person walking in the woods often lean against a tree with bare skin and stand still for more than a minute? How many people who got lost in the forest and were not found afterward, tired, fell asleep, leaning against a tree trunk? How many among ordinary trees can there be those? And how many times have I, or any of us, walked past such trees without knowing that it is the tree you should not lean against for more than a minute?